There are many different layouts that we can use in our vegetable garden. What we most commonly see are rows of a single crop followed by another crop, such as a row of peas followed by spinach and then carrots. This is a traditional row crop system, but there's a lot of alternatives to this that can be used to save space in the garden. We're going to explore a variety of these throughout the season, including vertical gardening, container gardening, and square foot gardening. And today we're going to begin with intensive bed gardening. That's the system that we're going to use for our larger areas in the garden. And this system, we grow crops in raised mounted beds. And the big advantage here is that we could fit 4 or 5 traditional rows in this smaller space. So we're really getting a space-saving advantage here. And one of the things that we're trying to do is create these growing areas with some walkways in between so that we could still get in here and work, harvest, whatever we need to do. Now, if you compare a traditional system to this raised system, you can really see the space-saving advantage. In a traditional cropping system, we have the rows of single crops, and they're spaced according to the standard recommended plant spacing. So, for example, rows of beans might be spaced 18 inches apart. Rows of tomatoes might be spaced 2.5 to 3 feet apart. And we end up with a lot of empty space between these rows. Now, in our intensive bed system, we have our wide 4 or 5 foot beds with very narrow rows in between. And if you compare the amount of space dedicated to growing food in the two of these, in the traditional row crop system, we only have about 32% of the area dedicated to vegetable production. Whereas in the intensive bed system, we have 63% covered in vegetables. So we're nearly doubling the amount of space to produce our vegetables in. I'm going to establish our intensive bed system here by creating a series of 5-foot mounded rows. And I've used string to mark 5-foot intervals with a 1-foot aisle in between. And the goal here is to create, sometimes you hear intensive gardening described as a permanent aisle, permanent bed system. And the idea is that this area in the middle is going to be permanently our growing bed right in here. And the aisle is always going to be an aisle. And that's important because once we have these established, we're not going to walk in our bed ever again. We're going to only walk in the aisle, and we're going to maintain our beds from the aisle. And what this is going to do is reduce soil compaction in here, and eventually we won't need to till our beds anymore because they're not going to get compacted. Now, the dimensions of our bed, I mentioned I'm establishing a 5-foot bed, but you can adjust that if you have shorter arms, for example, and you don't think you can reach in to the middle. You can make it narrower, 3 or 4 feet. You just want to be able to comfortably work the inside of the bed. Now, if you're taller, it's not always a good idea to make that bed wider because there might be some smaller people in your house, maybe some kids working in there. So you want to surely take into account everybody who might be working in the garden. So as you can see, I'm just pulling the soil up from what's going to be the aisle into the bed, and I'll rake that out and smooth it and spread it around. What we're doing here is actually creating a raised bed, and that's going to improve the drainage in our growing area. And eventually my goal is to get this 6 to 8 inches higher than my aisles. Well, as you can see here, I've created a nice rounded, mounded bed. And there's actually 2 different shapes you could use with your bed. You can have it rounded like this, or you can have a flat top. The rounded form actually has more surface area for planting because you could plant right up to the edge here. However, if you have problems with soil drainage, you might want to try a flat-topped bed and put in a little ridge to collect the water across the top, or a gully at the bottom to collect that runoff. But as we incorporate more and more organic matter into our beds over time, those soil drainage problems are going to be solved.